The sound cut through the narrow cabin like a blade. Either explain right now why my first-class seat was taken away, or this plane isn't taking off. The entire economy section of Skyline Air Flight 1187 fell silent. Seatbelt buckles froze mid-click, and dozens of eyes turned toward the aisle. There stood a black man, his back straight, the grey pinstripe suit on his shoulders wrinkled from a scuffle. His face calm in a way that came only from someone who'd tasted humiliation too many times and had nothing left to lose. He didn't shout, he didn't flail, but every word that left his lips landed like a hammer. Tell the truth, or no one leaves the ground. A woman in row 18 let out a tense sigh and pulled her daughter closer. A grey-haired businessman shook his head, frowning, worried about missing his connection. But among the murmurs of irritation, a few eyes lingered with understanding, realizing this wasn't just about a seat. His name was Aaron Mitchell, 42 years old. No one knew that the man being labeled a disruptive passenger was actually the CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems, a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity empire. In his hand was a first-class ticket for seat 1A barcode, unscanned, untouched. Yet now he'd been shoved into row 21C between two strangers under the excuse of weight balance. At the front of the cabin stood flight attendant Kelly Barnes, the one who issued the order. Her face was tight, her polite smile trembling under pressure, her eyes betraying defiance. She knew the flight was already 5 minutes late because of this passenger. She knew cameras were rolling, and she knew if things spiraled out of control, her career could vanish like smoke. Still, she believed a black man in an expensive suit couldn't possibly make an airline tremble. Aaron didn't move. He didn't curse. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there silent, his gaze burning like molten steel. A little girl by the window tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom, why won't they let that man sit in the nice seat?" The mother pulled her closer eyes, avoiding the question she didn't want to answer. In row 22, Jason Lee, a young tech journalist, lifted his phone. He recognized that face, the CEO behind the security system every startup had been talking about. Watching the scene unfold, his chest tightened. A man capable of protecting the world's data couldn't even protect his own right to sit in the seat he paid for. Aaron remained still. Under the soft yellow cabin lights, sweat glistened faintly across his forehead. He remembered the early years in Chicago, the son of a steel worker and a grade school teacher, mistaken for a waiter at his first corporate meeting. The endless apologies, the suspicious glances, the words random check that had become the soundtrack of his life. And now, even as a CEO, even with a business card that could open any door, he was still seen as someone unworthy of the front row. He took a slow, steady breath, not to calm himself, but to keep from exploding. "Don't let them make you forget your worth," his wife Maya's voice echoed in his mind. From the front, Kelly approached again, her voice sharp as a knife. "Sir, please fasten your seatbelt. If you refuse, we'll have to call security." Aaron turned toward her, just one look. No shouting, no threats, but it made her heartbeat stumble. "Do you know what's more frightening than security?" he said quietly, his voice deep. "It's the truth being exposed." The words froze the air. Several phones were already recording. Jason hit record. Passengers whispered, "Who is he? He looks familiar." From the cockpit, the captain's voice crackled over the radio. "What's going on, Kelly?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Passenger in row 21 refuses to sit down, claims discrimination." The captain paused for a few seconds before replying, "Weary, stay calm, don't make it a big deal." But it was already beyond control. On the ground, the network signal was strong. A tweet appeared, Aegis Cyber Systems CEO, removed from first-class seat for weight balance. Seat 1A still empty. Hashtag, grounded by bias. Within minutes, thousands of shares. News began to spread, and inside the silent cabin, a small spark was quietly catching fire. Aaron didn't know that out there, a hashtag bearing his name was turning into a storm. He only knew one thing: if he stayed silent tomorrow, there would be hundreds more pushed aside simply because they didn't look like first class. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not in amusement, but in resolve. He tightened his grip on the ticket in his hand, his voice steady firm, echoing through every corner of the cabin. Until I get an honest answer, I'm not sitting down. The engines hummed softly. The seatbelt light blinked red, but no one moved, because they all knew this flight was no longer just a journey from Dallas to San Francisco. It had become a confrontation between a man and the system. In the thick air, Jason whispered to the passenger beside him, "You feel it? Something's changing." And he was right. In that very moment, inside a cramped economy cabin, Aaron Mitchell had just launched a different kind of flight, one bound for justice. Before every eye on Skyline Air, Flight 1187, turned toward him, Aaron Mitchell had started his morning, like a man who believed he had everything under control. Sunlight from Dallas streamed through the tempered glass, spilling across the walnut floors of his 48th floor penthouse. The room was bright elegant, but cold, just like the silence inside his mind. On the table, an untouched cup of espresso still steamed, but Aaron didn't reach for it. He stood before the mirror, slowly tightening his Windsor knot until it was perfect, a ritual he performed every day. In the reflection, he saw a man with sharp features, dark circles under his eyes, and a kind of energy no caffeine could ever create willpower. He once heard someone say, "If you want to know how strong a man is, look at how he lives with the wounds he carries." And in that mirror, Aaron saw his own wound not on his skin, but carved deep into memory. 20 years earlier, in Southside Chicago, a thin young black man sat in the back of a classroom, listening to his father, Raymond Mitchell, a steel factory worker, speak in a gravelly voice after a long night shift. You can lose your job, your money, even your friends. But if you let someone make you forget your worth, you lose everything. Back then, Aaron only nodded. But every time someone mistook him for someone else, every time he was pulled aside for a random check, his father's words echoed like a hammer, striking hot steel. Now, 30 years later, Aaron was the CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems, one of America's leading data security firms. From a rundown 30-square-meter rental office, he had built Aegis into a multi-billion-dollar tech fortress, the company the world now trusted to protect its secrets. Yet Aaron knew one thing well-trust, whether in code or in people, always had vulnerabilities. This morning was the most important trip of his year. He was flying to San Francisco to finalize a $300 million acquisition with Novasphere Technologies, a deal that could open a new era for Aegis. He picked up his phone and called Priya Shah, 39, the COO and co-founder, who had been with him since their shared desk days in a university basement. Her voice came through the line fast and sharp beneath the rhythm of keyboard clicks. "Everything's ready, boss. Contracts files, paperwork all set. Novasphere still insists on maintaining independence." Aaron smiled, his tone low and steady. "He's an engineer. People who build code hate being managed. Paperwork won't fix resistance. People will. I'll talk to them myself." Priya laughed. Classic Mitchell, less talk, more action. Just get there on time. They'll listen to you." The call ended. Silence returned, broken only by the ticking of his Patek Philippe watch, the one he bought to celebrate Aegis's first $10 million contract. The metal was cold, yet it reflected every drop of sweat that had built his success. On his desk sat a silver-framed photo of his wife, Maya, and their 2 children. Their smiles were the only warmth in the room. Maya, a pediatrician, texted him the same words every morning. "Don't let them make you forget your worth." He took one last look at the picture, then slipped his phone into his pocket. The elevator glided smoothly down to the ground floor. Waiting beside a black Tesla Model S was Derek Johnson, his driver for the past 10 years. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Mr. Mitchell?" Beautiful, Aaron replied. "But let's see if it ends that way." Half joke, half truth. The car sped down Interstate 35 toward Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Outside, the Texas sun blazed its glare, painting a white streak across Aaron's composed face. Derek glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Gate C's under construction, but I'll get you there on time. Just keep your cool, boss." Aaron's lips curved slightly. "I've never been relaxed before a fight." His eyes dropped to the tablet in his lap, displaying integration charts for the upcoming Novosphere merger. It wasn't just about $300 million. It was about a dream, a global security ecosystem led by a man of color. He thought about his young employees, many Black, Asian, and Latin people who looked up to him as living proof that intelligence had no color. As the car turned into the airport entrance, Aaron exhaled slowly. Every time he walked into the priority check-in area, he saw the same thing, the look. Not everyone said something, but the look was always there. Curious, skeptical, as if to ask, "Are you sure you belong here?" He told himself nothing would shake his composure today. But the world often had its own way of testing patience. The overhead announcement echoed through the terminal. Skyline Air Flight 1187 to San Francisco is now boarding at Gate C-17. Aaron pulled his carry-on and joined the first-class priority line. The young attendant, Chloe Miller, looked up at the screen, then at him, her face lighting up. "Mr. Mitchell, I just read your Business Insider interview. I really admire how Aegis developed its AI security systems. That's incredible." He smiled softly, one of the rare smiles not meant to defend himself. "Thank you, Chloe. Just carry on today. Of course, Seat 1, A Gate, C-17. Have a great flight, sir." For once he was greeted exactly as who he was. But seconds later, Chloe's older co-worker, Mark Benson, shot him a long, uneasy glance, eyes scanning him from head to toe, one eyebrow raised. Aaron recognized that look instantly, the silent kind that said, "You don't look like someone who sits in first class." He kept smiling, took his ticket, but his steps grew heavier. As he walked down the blue-carpeted corridor, he felt the invisible weight of bias pressing against his shoulders. At security, the officer stared at his ID, longer than necessary. "Sir, please step aside for additional screening." Aaron lifted his gaze. "May I ask why? Random check." 2 words he knew by heart. He checked his watch every minute. Lost was $1 million delayed. 10 minutes later, he was waved through, no apology offered. As he walked on, a black security officer caught his eye and gave a subtle nod, a wordless exchange that said, "I get it." Aaron nodded back. Sometimes silence between 2 people who understand each other carries more weight than 1,000 apologies. Near the gate, he paused to help an elderly couple who looked lost. "Oh, thank you, young man. We thought you worked here," the old man said. Aaron smiled and pointed them toward their gate. When they disappeared into the crowd, his smile faded. A familiar ache stirred inside him, like an old wound reopened. He took a deep breath and wheeled his suitcase toward gate C-17, unaware that in just over an hour, this very place would turn into a battlefield, and he, the man once mistaken for a janitor, would force the world to relearn the meaning of one word, dignity. The corridor leading to gate C-17 was packed. The sound of suitcase wheels rolled softly over the marble floor, blending with the echo of announcements, the smell of coffee, and expensive perfume, all fusing into that familiar airport scent. The smell of waiting and hurry. Aaron Mitchell walked slowly, each step steady, as if he were heading into an important board meeting. In his hand was a first-class ticket, clearly printed with Seat 1, a Skyline Air Flight 1187 Dallas to San Francisco. A front-row window seat, the kind people called the seat of the accomplished. He didn't know that in just a few minutes, that ticket would become the symbol of a struggle the entire nation would witness. The first-class lounge was quieter, leather seats, softer, the lighting warmer. People sat reading newspapers, typing on laptops, or sipping white wine from the nearby lounge. Aaron chose a corner seat, opened the Harvard Business Review, and tried to detach himself from the noise, though he could still hear every whispered word. At the boarding counter flight attendant, Kelly Barnes leaned toward a co-worker and whispered, "Hey, today's first class has some strange ones. That guy, his suit's expensive, but he doesn't look like first-class material." Her voice dropped, but not enough. A few people nearby still heard it. These days, anyone can buy a first-class ticket, no matter how they look. Aaron glanced up, his eyes briefly meeting Kelly's. She turned away quickly, pretending to laugh with her colleague, but her cheeks flushed, part embarrassment, part fear of being caught saying exactly what she meant. He drew a slow breath. No reaction. No need. He reminded himself not every truth has to be shouted. Some just need to be remembered. When the boarding call echoed through the speakers, the first-class passengers began lining up. Kelly stood at the front, her professional smile back in place, though her eyes still carried a trace of unease. Aaron wheeled his suitcase forward. Ahead of him was a middle-aged white couple and a man in a golf polo. They were greeted with smiles and cheerful wishes for a pleasant flight. When it was Aaron's turn, that smile disappeared. The gate agent Ryan Cooper, about 31, with neatly cut blonde hair and a mild face, looked at the screen, then at Aaron, his expression stiffening. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell." His voice faltered slightly as he glanced toward Kelly behind him. There's a small issue with your ticket." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "What issue? This is a fully paid, first-class ticket." Ryan nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, that's correct. It's just that the system flagged a weight balance adjustment, so we need to reassign your seat. You'll be moved to row 21, C Economy Plus, with extra leg room. We appreciate your understanding." Aaron looked him straight in the eye. His voice was low but sharp, each word falling like a hammer. "Weight balance, I studied physics, Cooper. Moving a 90-kilogram man from the front to the middle doesn't change the aerodynamics of a plane." Ryan froze. Kelly stepped forward, her tone soft but edged. "Mr. Mitchell, it's just a small procedural matter. Economy Plus is still very comfortable for a short flight. If you don't cooperate, we could delay departure." Behind him, passengers began murmuring. "Always someone making a fuss," one said. "Why does this always happen?" another muttered. Aaron could feel the pressure of 100 eyes pressing against him. He knew this scene too well. If he lost his temper, they'd label him a black man causing a scene. If he stayed quiet, they'd win easily and gracefully, just like always. His hand tightened on the suitcase handle. I won't accept a seat change without official documentation. I want to speak to a supervisor. Ryan pressed his lips together and looked at Kelly. She gave a barely noticeable nod. We can't delay the flight, Mr. Mitchell. If you disagree, please contact customer service after landing. After landing. Those two words carried arrogance. Another way of saying, sit down and stop bothering us. Aaron glanced around. Faces frowned. A few sighed. He heard the faint clicking of a keyboard and the soft sound of a camera. Someone, maybe Jason Lee, the young reporter he hadn't yet noticed, was already recording this moment. A small moment, but one that would shake an entire industry. He exhaled, reached out, and accepted the new boarding pass. Very well, he said, calmly, his tone cold enough to sting. I'll remember every face here. As he stepped through the jet bridge, the atmosphere shifted from the warm yellow light of the gate to the sterile white glow of the aircraft cabin. Aaron walked through first-class rows of soft leather seats, champagne glasses, sparkling, passengers laughing in easy comfort. He paused for half a second, glancing at seat 1A. Empty. Untouched. The corner of his mouth twitched not in a smile, but in something between pain and contempt. At the back of the aisle, a young black flight attendant, Danielle Carter, 31, caught his eye. She glanced at the boarding pass in his hand, then at seat 1A. A slight nod, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to say, I know what's happening. And I'm with you. Aaron returned the nod in silence, then continued down the aisle. The economy cabin was crowded, the scent of cologne mixed with plastic seats. He lifted his suitcase into the overhead bin and sat down in row 21C, wedged between two strangers. The seat was tight shoulders pressed together. His Tom Ford suit looked out of place like a lion trapped among goats. He leaned back, eyes closed, breathing deep. Stay calm, stay rational. But his heartbeat pounded harder, like a drum from the past, calling him to rise. He remembered being pulled aside for extra screening at a tech conference, despite the speaker badge around his neck. He remembered being asked by a mall security guard, "Do you work here just after delivering a keynote?" Each incident a small cut, and today they'd just cut again. He opened his eyes and looked through the gap between seats. There it was, seat 1. Afar ahead, still empty, gleaming under the cabin lights like a silent provocation. A spark flickered in his mind. Not an idea for technology, a resolve. If they thought he'd stay silent like everyone else, they'd chosen the wrong man. Today on this flight, they had just lit the fuse of truth, and justice would be his final destination. The economy cabin was narrower and dimmer than Aaron Mitchell had imagined. The yellow light reflected off the silver-white walls, making his face appear even more isolated. He sat between two strangers, their shoulders touching the space, so tight that even the sound of fabric shifting with each breath was audible. The scent of plastic seats' perfume and coffee mingled in the air, thick enough to choke on. In front of him, the tray table rattled slightly as the plane prepared for departure. A cold voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We'll be departing in just a few minutes." Aaron pulled the belt across his lap, then paused. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anger. An anger that had ripened, no longer hot, but sharpened like a blade. In the row beside him, Jason Lee, the young tech journalist, glanced again, stealing a look. He'd already recognized this man, the CEO the tech world called the Silent Guardian. But now Jason didn't see the composure of a CEO. he saw a man cornered between the walls of injustice. Jason reached for his phone, opened the app once known as Twitter. His fingers shook, not from nerves, but from the weight of knowing he was about to witness something far bigger than news. He pressed the shutter. A soft click. On screen, the image was clear. The glowing first-class cabin ahead. Seat 1A, empty, while the black man who was meant to sit there was trapped in row 21C. Jason typed the caption, "Curious why the CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems, Aaron Mitchell, is sitting in economy, while Seat 1A remains empty. Skyline Air, how's that weight balance? Working out hashtag grounded by bias." The post button glowed, one tap, and a storm began to form in silence. Aaron didn't know that outside this cabin, thousands of screens were lighting up with notifications. All he saw was that empty seat far ahead, a golden insult burning into his mind. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, steadying himself. From the front of the cabin, Danielle Carter, the black flight attendant he had met at boarding, was serving drinks. As she passed his row, she paused for half a second, seemingly by accident, and dropped a napkin onto his tray. Aaron unfolded it. Inside was a small printout from the flight manifest. It read clearly, "Passenger Aaron Mitchell. Seat 1A confirmed. Change none." In the bottom corner, a line was handwritten, "This isn't right." His chest tightened. It felt like a breath of oxygen breaking through the suffocating air. Someone inside was on his side. He folded. The note slipped it under his finger, said nothing. But in his mind, everything had shifted. This was no longer personal. It was an indictment of a system drowning in deceit. Jason's phone buzzed violently. He looked down. The post had passed 5,000 shares in 20 minutes. Major tech accounts were tagging the airline. The hashtag grounded by bias was climbing the trending chart. Comments filled the feed. "Can't believe this still happens. If this is real, Skyline Air is finished. Justice should take off, not be weight-balanced." Jason turned to Aaron and whispered, "Mr. Mitchell, the tweet's exploding. The whole tech world's watching." Aaron opened his eyes, his voice low and solid as granite. "Jason, don't think this is about me. This is about everyone who's ever been dismissed just because they didn't look like they belonged." Jason nodded, his throat tight. The man on Aaron's left turned and said, "I saw them stop you at the gate. That was wrong. I'll testify if you need it." A white woman, a few rows ahead, spoke up. "I fly this route every week. I've never heard of weight balance being used to move a first-class passenger." A ripple spread through the cabin, sympathy replacing silence. Aaron looked down at the note, then out the window. The Texas sunlight sliced through the airplane wing, reflecting like a line of fire across the glass. His father's voice echoed in his head. "You can be twice as good, but they'll still check you 3 times. So do something they can't ignore." He knew this was that moment. If he stayed seated, he'd be like all those who had stayed silent before change ever came. If he stood up, he might lose the deal, the money, even his reputation, but he'd keep himself. His heart pounded, but his inner voice was clear. Not today. Not anymore. Beside him, Jason whispered, "What are you going to do?" Aaron unbuckled his seatbelt, the motion decisive. "Take back the truth." He laid the note on the tray, smoothed it flat, then rose to his feet. The cabin gasped. Several passengers looked up. The hum of the air system filled the silence, but the sound of his seatbelt clicking open rang like a gavel. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, but carried through every row. "I need to speak to the captain. There's a serious issue that must be resolved before takeoff." At the front, Kelly Barnes turned pale. Mr. Mitchell, please, sit down. The plane is preparing to depart. No, he replied evenly. I'm not sitting until someone explains why the seat I paid for is still empty. A deadly silence fell. Then, like dominoes falling, phones lifted across the cabin. Jason pressed record. In that moment, Aaron Mitchell stood alone in the narrow aisle, a dark arrow aimed straight into the heart of the system, silent but impossible to ignore. Kelly gripped her clipboard, her lips trembling. If you don't sit down, I'll have to call security. Aaron's gaze locked onto hers, his eyes glowing under the dim cabin light. You can call whoever you want. But remember, the most dangerous thing on this plane isn't me. It's the truth you're trying to hide. The air thickened. Every whisper died. A little girl asked softly, Mom, what's happening? And her mother replied with a single sentence everyone could feel. A man is taking back his seat. The cabin door closed. The engines began to rumble, distant thunder building beneath them. But before the plane could even move, another storm had already begun right here inside this sealed sky. Aaron stood tall, silent. The light caught the edge of his face, carving it in a fiery outline like molten steel. He didn't know what awaited him beyond this flight, only that this was the beginning of a battle the whole world would soon witness. The cabin of Skyline Air Flight 1187 was now thick with tension, almost suffocating. The engines still roared outside, but inside every second of silence felt ready to explode. In the narrow aisle, Aaron Mitchell stood tall, his deep red tie slightly askew after unbuckling his seatbelt. The warm yellow light of the cabin reflected across his face, a face no longer restrained, but illuminated by absolute determination. I need to speak to the captain. Right now. His voice rang clear and firm, each word striking the air like a nail being driven in. A white woman in the front row hissed quietly to her husband. Again. They always have to make a scene. But her husband calmer replied under his breath, No, he's different. There's something in his eyes. The economy cabin stirred with uneasy murmurs. Some passengers looked away. Others raised their phones, their cameras aimed at him. In row 21, Jason Lee was ready, his lens glowing red. He knew this moment was turning into history. From the front of the cabin, lead flight attendant Kelly Barnes strode down the aisle. Her heels struck the floor sharply, each step echoing like a drill into the charged silence. Mr. Mitchell, I'm ordering you to sit down immediately. Standing in the aisle violates flight safety regulations. Her voice was sharp, high-heavy, with false authority. Aaron didn't back away. He faced her squarely now, only half a meter apart. There's nothing safe about a lie. Excuse me, Kelly faltered. The seat I paid for is still empty, and you know it. This so-called weight balance is nothing but a cover. I'm not moving until I get an honest explanation. The murmur grew louder. An elderly man in row 25 called out, I've flown this route for 10 years. Never seen anyone moved for that reason. A young woman added, If it were me, I couldn't stay quiet either. Kelly spun around, snapping, Everyone please stay calm. This is an internal matter. No one has the right to interfere. That sentence was the spark. Jason looked up and spoke clearly, his voice ringing through the cabin. I'm a tech journalist with Tech World. I'm recording right now, and I have a photo of seat 1A still empty. If you call this an internal matter, remember this, the whole world is watching. Kelly's face drained of color. She didn't yet know that down on the ground, the hashtag #GroundedByBias was spreading like wildfire. In less than 30 minutes, hundreds of thousands had shared it. Major news outlets were already dispatching reporters to the airport. Aaron looked around, his gaze sweeping over the faces turned toward him. A middle-aged man nodded in silent support. A young student whispered, "Stand tall, man." The air shifted. Fear turned into unity. Quiet solidarity filled the cabin. The cockpit door opened. A woman stepped out, First Officer Emily Rogers, 34, her hair tied neatly back, her face composed but tense. "What's happening here, Kelly? This passenger refuses to sit down. He's disrupting the flight." Emily looked at Aaron, then paused when she saw the printed manifest on the tray in front of him. "You are Aaron Mitchell, CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems. I purchased seat 1A. My seat was changed without a valid reason. I want to speak to the highest authority on this aircraft." Emily took the document, her eyes stopping at the line that read Seat 1A confirmed. She was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "I'll call the captain." Kelly interrupted sharply, her voice rising. "Emily, we're already delayed. Just have him removed from the plane." "No, Kelly." Emily cut her off, her tone low but icy. "We're not taking off under these conditions. Not with me on board." 1 minute later, Captain Robert Hayes appeared. Tall, silver-haired, commanding, he had flown for 30 years, but he had rarely seen anything like this, a passenger standing in the middle of the cabin, the entire section filming. He looked first at Kelly, then at Aaron. "What's going on here?" Captain Kelly began, her voice trembling. "This passenger refuses to sit down even after we reassigned him for weight balance." Aaron held up 2 boarding passes, his tone calm and firm. "Here's the evidence. Seat 1A is mine. There's no documentation supporting a seat change. I was moved here without clear explanation, and I believe the real reason has nothing to do with weight, but with skin color." Silence fell heavy as stone. The last sentence rippled through the cabin like a rock thrown into still water, shaking every gaze that met it. Captain Hayes adjusted his cap slightly, then turned to Emily. "I need the manifest." She handed him the paper she was already holding. Hayes scanned it quickly, his face darkening with each line. "Seat 1A is still empty." "Yes, Captain." Hayes looked at Kelly. "Do you have confirmation from ground control for this reassignment?" Kelly stammered. Ryan at the gate said, "The system flagged." "I didn't ask what Ryan said. I asked if you have written confirmation." "No, Captain." He nodded slowly, then ordered, "Bring Ryan up here." "Now." The cabin erupted in applause. One passenger shouted, "That's right, it's time to get the truth." Another called out, "This isn't just about a seat. It's about dignity." Kelly stood frozen, her hands trembling, the practiced smile gone from her face. She realized this battle had spun far beyond her control. Aaron didn't smile or gloat. He simply nodded like a man who knew the real confrontation had only just begun. Outside the window, the Dallas sunset blazed deep red, reflecting off the airplane wing, a red that looked like blood, like fire newly sparked in the dark. And inside Flight 1187, that fire named Justice had officially ignited. The cabin door opened once more. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the narrow aisle, blending with the anxious murmur of hundreds of passengers holding their breath. Ryan Cooper, the gate agent, appeared, his face pale sweat soaking the collar of his shirt. Captain Robert Hayes stood firmly in the center aisle, his arms crossed, his posture commanding like a judge, presiding over a courtroom in the sky. Mr. Cooper, the captain, said in a deep, steady voice, "I need you to explain why passenger Aaron Mitchell, who holds a first-class ticket for seat 1A, was forced into economy, while that seat remains empty. Ryan swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain, the system, it flagged a weight balance alert, so I thought it was best if, from the back of the cabin, Danielle Carter, the black flight attendant, cut in her voice, sharp as steel. I just checked the crew system myself. There's no such alert. The entire manifest shows only one passenger reassigned Mr. Mitchell. The cabin erupted in gasps. A wave of whispers spread like an electric current. Captain Hayes stared Ryan down. You thought, or someone told you, to Ryan's forehead glistened with sweat as his eyes darted toward Kelly Barnes. Kelly stepped back, her voice trembling. I only suggested rechecking because I thought there was something unusual. That's all I didn't unusual. Where Miss Barnes Hayes interrupted his tone, cutting like metal. He just didn't look like a first-class passenger. The word slipped out, and the cabin exploded. The murmurs turned to shouts. A woman cried out, "What do you mean he doesn't look like one? He paid like everyone else." An older man raised his phone to record. This is exactly why America needs change. Kelly froze in place. She realized she had just spoken aloud the very prejudice she'd spent her life hiding. In the middle of the chaos, Aaron Mitchell stood still, composed, calm in a way that seemed almost unreal. The white cabin lights cast a glow over his face, forming a halo, as if the sky itself was shining down on the only man brave enough to speak truth. He looked at Kelly, his voice heavy but free of anger. I don't need an apology. I need the truth. The cabin fell silent. A young man in a grey suit stood up. I'm a labor attorney. If necessary, I'll testify to this in court. A woman in row 23 added, I fly this route every week. I've never once seen weight balance used as a reason to move someone who's already boarded. Voices joined together, forming a tide of solidarity. Aaron felt the cabin rising with him, not physically, but in spirit. From row 21, Jason Lee leaned forward, his phone vibrating non-stop. Mr. Mitchell, he whispered. CNN, Reuters, even AP, they're all covering it. The hashtag grounded by bias is #1 nationwide. Aaron nodded faintly. He felt no pride, no triumph, only a deep heaviness in his chest. He hadn't sought fame. All he wanted was to fly to San Francisco and close a $300 million deal, just another business trip. But prejudice had turned his journey into a courtroom above the clouds. Captain Hayes took a long breath, his voice thundering like distant lightning. I will not tolerate deceit on my aircraft. Ms. Barnes, Mr. Cooper, you've created a situation that threatens not only this airline's credibility, but the reputation of the entire aviation industry. Kelly bowed her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ryan stood frozen, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Hayes turned to Aaron, his expression stern, yet respectful. Mr. Mitchell, on behalf of the airline, I apologize for what's happened, but I need to consult with management before taking any action. I don't want to make a rash decision mid-flight. Aaron replied softly, his tone steady. I'm not seeking revenge, Captain. I'm seeking justice right here before we take off. The cockpit door opened again. A voice crackled through the intercom. Captain Hayes, this is Martin Alvarez, Ground Operations Supervisor. I'm boarding with Regional Director Lauren Price. They request to meet immediately. All eyes turned toward the front as two figures entered the cabin. Lauren, dressed in a navy blue suit, carried herself with authority, her expression cold and composed. Martin followed tense, clutching a tablet. Lauren spoke firmly. We're not turning this into a protest. Mr. Mitchell, I assure you everything will be handled properly once we land. Aaron met her gaze, his eyes piercing through every layer of corporate pretense. If injustice happens right in front of hundreds of witnesses and we stay silent, then when will justice ever take flight? Lauren said nothing. Martin glanced at his tablet, where breaking news headlines flashed across the screen. BlackCeo forced out of first-class Skyline Air in chaos. He swallowed hard. Lauren, this can't wait until we land. It's live out there. The entire cabin went silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. Aaron looked around, his gaze sweeping across every face, passengers, attendants, and the captain alike. If I stay silent today, tomorrow, someone else will be treated the same. And Ms. Barnes, Mr. Cooper, you'll go on believing it's normal. His voice dropped, weighted with truth. Silence is how injustice survives the longest. Applause erupted from the back of the cabin, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire cabin was on its feet, voices rising together. That's right, justice now. The chant filled the air like a wave. Lauren Price drew a deep breath, then turned to Captain Hayes. All right, I'll connect with headquarters. Bring him to the cockpit. The captain nodded. Mr. Mitchell, please come with me. It's time we speak to the people who make the decisions. Oren took one last look at the economy cabin. Jason was still filming. Danielle met his gaze, her lips moving silently. Go get them. Aaron smiled faintly, then followed the captain. As the cockpit door closed behind him, the cabin fell into stillness. A woman's voice trembled through the quiet. I think we just witnessed history. And she was right. History had just been rewritten, not with a pen, but by a man who dared to stand up in a cramped cabin 10,000 meters below the clouds. The cockpit door closed, sealing off the noise of the cabin behind it. The space was small, barely enough for 4 people, but the air inside felt so heavy it could be cut with a knife. Across from Aaron Mitchell sat a row of tense faces. Captain Robert Hayes, tall and composed, with eyes that carried the calm of a man who had once kept control through a storm over the Pacific. Beside him was First Officer Emily Rogers, younger but sharp, her gaze steady, still burning with indignation she couldn't quite hide. Opposite them sat Lauren Price, Skyline Air's regional director, rigid in her seat, fingers interlocked, forcing herself to appear composed. And finally, Martin Alvarez, the ground supervisor, holding tightly to a tablet connected directly to Rebecca Cole, the airline's Eastern Regional Vice President. Her voice cut through the cockpit speakers, precise, cool, and surgical. This is Rebecca Cole, she said, her tone crisp as steel. First, Mr. Mitchell, allow me to apologize on behalf of Skyline Air. However, since the flight is nearly an hour behind schedule, we ask that you return to your seat so we can depart. The matter will be fully investigated after landing. Aaron didn't answer right away. He turned his gaze to the small window beside him, where the setting sun cast its glow across the horizon. The sky had deepened into violet. Under that fading light, his face was still calm but unyielding. No, Miss Cole, he said, slowly, clearly, each word deliberate. This happened in public in front of hundreds of people. It will be resolved here and now in the light. Lauren shifted slightly, her voice cautious but measured. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but it's not frustration, Aaron cut in his tone, low and cold. This is systemic bias, and I won't allow it to be swept back into the shadows again. Emily nodded subtly. Captain Hayes glanced at her and saw the same conviction mirrored in her eyes. Rebecca's tone sharpened. Mr. Mitchell, we respect you, but you cannot hold an entire flight hostage over a personal incident. Aaron gave a short laugh, not amused but bitter. Hostage, that's interesting. Then tell me for all these years when millions of black passengers were pulled aside, twice, reseated, or treated like intruders on flights they paid for what? Were they not hostages of bias? No one spoke. The only sound came from the low hum of the engines outside. Aaron laid his boarding pass and the printed manifest on the control panel. I'm not here asking for special treatment. I'm asking this airline to behave normally, to be fair, transparent, and respectful. That's all. Rebecca exhaled audibly through the speaker. Her voice softened, but beneath it, calculation stirred. Mr. Mitchell, I'm aware you're the CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems. I've also been informed that Aegis is on our list of potential technology partners. You must understand we value that relationship deeply. I'm sure we can find a smoother resolution. The sentence barely finished before Aaron's eyes turned to steel. If you're implying that I'll be more forgiving because of money, you've chosen the wrong man. I don't want better treatment because I'm a CEO. I want this system to stop treating others worse because they're not. The air grew denser, the silence sharper. Lauren turned towards the screen. Rebecca, I think we should listen. Captain Hayes nodded slowly. I agree. Nobody here wants to take off in a storm. And trust me, this isn't just about a seat. There was a pause. Rebecca's voice returned, less defensive now. Then what is it you want? Mr. Mitchell Aaron leaned back. His hands interlaced, his tone steady, deliberate, like a man who had rehearsed this moment his entire life. I want Skyline Air to commit to 3 things. First, mandatory training on unconscious bias and discrimination for all frontline staff. Second, a transparent system for recording and addressing complaints with public reporting on progress. Third, the establishment of an independent diversity council with the authority to review and veto unjust policies. He paused, meeting the camera with unwavering eyes. And I want it documented and made public right now, not after landing, not after the media moves on. Rebecca said nothing. Martin glanced down at his tablet and whispered, The company's stock has dropped 3% in the last 45 minutes. #grounded by bias is #1 nationwide. Lauren spoke carefully. Rebecca, if we don't act now, the damage will be far worse. Rebecca's voice came back rougher, almost weary. Mr. Mitchell, what you're asking will cost millions and take time to implement. I can't make that kind of promise right here. Aaron tilted his head slightly, his tone cutting sharper than any blade. More costly than 3% of your market value, because that's what that hashtag just cost you. The silence stretched long. Then Rebecca spoke again, her voice stripped of command, replaced by reluctant concession. I understand. I'll bring this to the board. But we need your cooperation. Please return to your seat so the flight can depart. In exchange, I'll issue an immediate public statement committing to investigation and reform. Aaron turned to Captain Hayes. What do you think? Hayes replied plainly, I think she should issue that statement before takeoff. No one leaves the ground while the truth is still buried beneath it. Rebecca hesitated, then exhaled. Fine. Agreed. The statement will be released within 10 minutes. Aaron nodded once, his voice soft but resonant, stronger than any threat. I don't want to destroy this airline. I just want to see an industry that's fairer. If today's events make that happen, then losing one flight is worth it. Captain Hayes stood slowly and extended his hand. Mr. Mitchell, you've helped us ensure not only a safe landing, but an honorable one. Aaron took his hand. In that moment, 2 forces, one born of technological power, the other of disciplined flight, met and sealed a silent pact for a new chapter. When the cockpit door opened, the light from the cabin spilled in. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Aaron stepped out, shoulders straight, eyes steady. And as applause rippled through the plane, spreading row by row, he understood this fight wouldn't end when the plane took off. It had only just taken flight. The cockpit door opened, and a stream of warm yellow light from the passenger cabin poured in softer, more human than the cold white glare inside. Aaron Mitchell stepped out, his posture straight like a man who had just walked through a storm, yet still carried himself with the dignity of a commander who refused to bow. The airplane cabin, which only moments ago had been frozen in tense silence, now erupted with applause, steady, rhythmic, like rain on a tin roof. No one shouted slogans, no one called his name. But every clap carried something deeper, the sound of recognition, of belief from people who had bowed their heads in the face of injustice and now saw someone stand tall on their behalf. First Officer Emily Rogers motioned for the crew to calm the crowd. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be departing shortly." But her words couldn't quiet the tide of emotion rising through the cabin. From economy class flight attendant, Danielle Carter walked forward, holding a bottle of cold water. She stopped in front of Aaron, her eyes bright with honest respect. On behalf of those who don't have a position to speak, she said softly, "Thank you." Aaron accepted it with a small nod, silent. He knew that for her, those few words carried the weight of years of silence, finally given a voice. A few rows away, Kelly Barnes, the flight attendant who had caused it all, sat with her head bowed, gripping the edge of her seat, her lips trembling, as if praying for the nightmare to end. Ryan Cooper, the gate agent, sat slumped on the jump seat, sweat trickling down his forehead. He stared at his hands, the same hands that had pressed the reassigned seat button simply because of someone else's whisper, and now they felt heavier than iron. Aaron walked slowly down the aisle. With each step, the whispering rose again. "Who is he? He's the CEO of Aegis Cyber Systems. I just saw the news, the hashtag is exploding. A man who made the whole system bow its head. The voices rippled around him, but Aaron didn't let them touch him. He wasn't chasing glory. He was simply returning to the seat he had rightfully paid for. When he reached the front row, he stopped. Seat 1. The seat that had set an entire nation talking, sat there waiting, spotless, gleaming, as if the whole flight had been holding its breath for this moment. He inhaled deeply and sat down. The soft leather embraced him, but the feeling was no longer comfort. It was validation. The seat was no longer just a place to sit. It was a symbol. A soft ding sounded, and Captain Hayes's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew, I want to apologize for the serious incident that occurred earlier. Skyline Air is committed to a full investigation and comprehensive reform to ensure that every passenger is treated with absolute respect. Thank you for your patience." The cabin erupted in applause once more. But this time, it wasn't for one man, it was for a message. In the middle of the plane, Jason Lee, the young journalist, kept recording, his eyes glistening. He knew what he was capturing wasn't just a headline, it was proof of the moment humanity overcame prejudice. Aaron checked his phone. Messages flooded in. Priya Shah, Aegis's COO, had written, "Aaron, you're on every major news channel. Stay calm. The entire board stands behind you." Then a call came from Henderson, CEO of Novasphere Technologies, the company he was supposed to meet in San Francisco. Henderson's voice was bright with energy. "Aaron, I just saw the live stream. Honestly, I've never seen anyone stand up like that. Novasphere needs a partner with integrity. If you're still willing, we'll meet the moment you land. I believe together we can build something far bigger than that $300 million deal." Aaron smiled a real smile, free of pride, the kind that comes from realizing that sometimes losing a small battle is the only way to win a greater war. He ended the call and leaned back. The sunset poured through the window, painting the cabin in shades of burning bronze. Below the wings, Dallas grew smaller and smaller, shrinking into a patch of memory, the city where he had been doubted, overlooked, pushed to the back of the line. And now he wasn't just sitting in the front row. He was flying with an entire message carried behind him. A few rows back, Jason Lee typed quickly on his laptop, crafting the opening line of the article he knew would define his career. When a black man was forced out of his first-class seat, he didn't just stand for himself. He made the world question what it truly means to be worthy. He looked up toward seat 1A. Aaron was staring out the window, the reflection of light flickering in his eyes like a quiet flame, steady, unextinguished. Jason realized he had just witnessed a story the world would retell hundreds of times, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. A child's voice rose softly from the middle rows. "Mum, did that man win?" The mother smiled gently, squeezing her daughter's hand. "No, sweetheart. He didn't win against anyone. He just made fairness win." The plane began to move, the sun slipping beneath the horizon. Aaron closed his eyes, letting the sound of the wheels rolling on the tarmac merge with the rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, he thought of the countless unnamed people who had been pushed out of the first-class seats of their own lives, those without cameras, without hashtags, without anyone to speak for them. He whispered quietly, just for himself, "This time I won't let that story repeat." The plane lifted off the body, trembling softly as it climbed. The last rays of sunlight glowed across his face, a golden trace of the day now past. And in that instant, Aaron Mitchell understood this seat was no longer a reward for status, but a symbol of truth reclaimed. Outside, the sky opened wide like a promise that after today, every passenger, no matter who they are, will have the right to sit exactly where they belong. 6 months had passed since the fateful Skyline Air Flight 1187, yet its echo had not faded. It had spread like a crack through glass, forcing the entire airline industry to look at itself. On a bright spring afternoon, the stage lights glowed across the New York Convention Center. More than 3,000 people fell silent as Aaron Mitchell walked onto the stage, still in his gray suit, still calm and composed, but now with a light in his eyes that only exists in those who have walked through storms and returned stronger. Behind him on the massive LED screen, the words appeared, "Integrity is non-negotiable." His voice resonated deep and steady. 6 months ago, I stood up on a flight not to reclaim a seat, but to reclaim respect for those who had grown too used to being overlooked. But what moved me the most wasn't the hashtag, it was how the world responded. In the front row, Priya Shah, now chairwoman of Aegis Cyber Systems, nodded quietly. Beside her sat Jason Lee, the young journalist who had filmed that day, smiling faintly with a notebook full of scribbles resting on his lap. Aaron continued. Skyline Air did something few corporations ever dare to do. They admitted their mistake and made it right. They implemented the 3 commitments I once demanded, and even more. The hall fell still as the screen behind him displayed a sequence of images airline employees in anti-bias training sessions, a public reporting system, tracking discrimination cases, updated quarterly, and the first meeting of the new Diversity and Equality Council, where Danielle Carter, the flight attendant who had quietly helped him that day, now sat as Vice President of Passenger Equity. The audience erupted into applause. Aaron smiled softly, then said, "I've learned that true change doesn't begin with an apology. It begins with repeated action every single day. And change always has a cost." On the screen, a new image appeared. Kelly Barnes, no longer in a flight attendant uniform, but standing at a university lectern, teaching a class titled Unconscious Bias. A caption read, "Kelly Barnes, former Skyline air flight attendant. After her contract was terminated, she returned to school, earned her master's in labor relations, and became a public speaker for equality programs." The room went quiet. No laughter, no applause, just understanding. Because sometimes redemption itself is a contribution to justice. The next image appeared, Ryan Cooper, the gate agent who initiated the seat reassignment. He sat in a Skyline employee meeting room in front of documents labeled Internal Bias Review. A subtitle appeared, Ryan Cooper, after completing retraining, was retained as an internal transparency coordinator. He authored the first report for the initiative known as the Mitchell Standard. The audience murmured softly. A few nodded in approval. Aaron's tone deepened. "I never wanted anyone to lose their job. I wanted people to learn from their mistakes. Justice isn't about removing the bad. It's about helping people become better." At the back of the hall, the screen shifted again, showing news headlines. 3 major airlines had adopted new anti-bias reporting systems modeled after the Mitchell Standard. Banks, hotel chains, and service corporations were studying the same ethical framework to ensure fairness in customer experiences. What began as a hashtag grounded by bias had become a global slogan for equitable service. The entire audience rose applause, thunderous as a storm. Aaron bowed his head slightly, the stage lights glinting off the streaks of grey in his hair. In that moment, he understood true power was never in the first-class seat. It was in using that seat to lift others up. As the crowd began to disperse, Aaron's phone buzzed with a message from Maya, his wife. "Proud of you. But don't forget our daughter has her piano recital tonight." He chuckled quietly. The man who had sparked reform across an entire industry was still at heart a husband and father heading home for dinner. Outside the convention center, light rain began to fall. Aaron pulled his coat tighter and looked up at the raindrops glimmering under the streetlights. He thought back to Flight 1187, the cramped cabin, the smell of plastic, the condescending stares the moment he stood up. One man stood, and the world had to lift its head. And in the whispering rain, he knew justice never arrives on its own. It always takes someone willing to rise from row 21C so that all of humanity can finally sit where they belong. Early the next morning, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport greeted the sunrise with a crystal-clear light after the night's rain. In the first-class check-in area, Aaron Mitchell arrived quietly, carrying only a small leather suitcase. No cameras, no reporters, no cheering crowd. At the counter, a young South Asian attendant looked up, her smile warm and genuine. "Welcome back, Mr. Mitchell. Seat 1A is ready for you. And thank you for what you've done for the airline and for all of us." He responded with a slight nod. No words were needed. It was enough to know that her smile no longer carried the hesitation it once did. The departure gate was still C-17, the very place where everything had begun. Now a small plaque hung there, reading, "Equality starts here." Aaron brushed his fingers lightly over the words, a calm sense of peace rising in his chest. He stepped onto the plane. Captain Robert Hayes greeted him at the cabin door, his eyes bright. "An honor to have you with us again, Mr. Mitchell. The airline has changed a lot in these 6 months." Aaron smiled. "Not just the airline, Robert. This little world of ours has changed too." He settled into seat 1A. The window opened to a vast blue sky. Below the wing, the city of Dallas shimmered in reflection, a reminder that every great journey begins with one small decision: to stand up. The engines hummed softly. Morning light poured through the window, casting a warm glow over his face, where calm had replaced the anger of the past. He closed his eyes and heard his father's voice echo in his mind. "Sometimes silence is complicity. You must know where you stand." And he did. Today that line was no longer blurred. It had been redrawn with courage, with dignity, and with the quiet belief that justice doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be lived. The plane ascended into the sky, carrying with it a world that had just learned a simple truth: not every flight takes you to another city. Some take all of humanity closer to justice. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership, the journey of Aaron Mitchell is not just the story of a man reclaiming a seat that was taken from him, but a testament to the power of dignity when placed in its rightful position. He did not fight back with anger, but with a calm so profound it forced an entire system to look inward. When one person dares to stand for what is right, he doesn't just change his own outcome, he sets a new standard for how the world treats one another, the Mitchell standard. Justice doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs to be practiced in the way we work, respect and uphold human worth. If you believe that every small action can shape greater fairness. Like to share that belief, subscribe to join us on journeys where justice is told through kindness and comment. The phrase that reflects your conviction: hold your dignity.